Hello friends, today I have a supercut for you from an older series I did where I was playing as multiple iterations of a mage where I attempted to find the best RimWorld of Magic class to beat a world populated solely by zombies, all leading up to me surviving for 100 days as the greatest magical class. I do currently have some personal family stuff going on in my personal life this week, and I also really miss the Zombieland mod, so I thought this supercut might be perfect for this starting pre-spooky season. I hope you enjoy. Hey folks, how's it hanging? It is I, your Rat Daddy, and today I welcome you to the RimWorld Zombieland experience with a businessman known as Stone. Stone is just your average citizen, average businessman who is an academy student that grew up to be a rocket engineer with some pretty mild skill sets, but he has a secret. For you see, Stone here is a novice lightning mage. And so we're going to be putting him in a zombie-filled city just to see basically how well he does. This is a bit of a test for a 100 days video that I wanted to do, and also something of a failed attempt. But of course, credit where credit is due. This is based on a comment by our good friend Awaken Kraken 3844, who says, "Now I'm curious how magic will handle with the Zombieland mod." Well, my friend, we are going to find out. Now, when we first spawned in, of course, there were no zombies, but there were plenty of citizens and whatnot in this city. So we went house to house, building to building, looking for resources and whatnot. That way we would know where they were when the zombies eventually came, and trust me, they definitely did. As one might imagine, the first thing these zombies began doing was attacking the citizens of this fine city, unfortunately turning many of them into zombies and also zombie food. It's also worth mentioning that this fine city is a British city, and that is because we're using the RimWorld War II mod, which is kind of the basis for the factions here. Speaking of the British soldiers though, I found one of the handsome young chaps lying on the ground with either food poisoning or just completely disgusted by the zombies, so anyways he was throwing up. I decided to take his gear. Like I said, this video is mostly just me testing out what it would be like to be a mage in Zombieland, and I was quickly beginning to learn that even though we are a mage with magical abilities and whatnot, that firearms and other types of weapons were extremely crucial for survival. Just as well, of course, like food as in any other Zombieland series. So as Stone eats his last meal for the night before falling asleep next to this very dangerous looking generator, I must say that thus far this is no different than any other Zombieland playthrough. Then again, it has only been like 1 day, so who knows? As we slept throughout the night, the zombies would only spread more and more, increasing their stranglehold upon the city. The next day, of course, we would begin exploring more and more buildings before the zombies totally took over. There was really no way of stopping that from happening, so we just kind of continued mapping out where different items were and which buildings, of course. We eventually stumbled upon a massive stockpile of food in what appeared to be a very large freezer. Obviously, I thought this was going to come in handy. Unfortunately, though, it was about this time that things really began ramping up with the zombies. They were everywhere, which of course, as you could imagine, made it quite difficult to move around the city finding new items and buildings without getting attacked. Now, it's also worth noting that up until this point, I hadn't been taking any of the items that I had been finding, even off the corpses of the fallen British soldiers, and the reason for this, I didn't want to upset them because it would be very easy for me to take these things and make them angry, and then not only would I be fighting zombies, I would also be fighting the townspeople and their soldiers, yada yada. But seeing how the zombies have mostly taken over by this point, I don't really think it matters anymore. I found this very interesting looking warehouse with plenty of food that I decided to turn into my base of operations for the moment. That night, a child named Olaf, who apparently was a German slave, had entered the building, and he was also something of a technomancer, so a magical being just as ourselves. I promised myself that I would take good care of this young lad and kind of take him under my wing. Even if that meant that we had to capture him, enslave him, or recruit him, I wanted him to be part of the team. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges with that is that scores of zombies were beginning to pile up outside our walls, and I had no control over where this child went or what he did. Before morning, though, Stone had managed to develop a magical skill point, and we used this for a new lightning ability. We ran outside the next morning to grab an RPG, and then we would get to test out this new lightning ability. As you can see, it basically did nothing. And unfortunately, as a result, we were unable to stop the zombies from killing and then eating our young German Olaf. Though I was beginning to see just how strong these zombies were and as to why our abilities were basically doing nothing. After hitting them with an RPG blast, only one or two of them managed to die. Obviously, the basic RimWorld mechanics of fighting normal pawns, like a pain shock threshold and whatnot, doesn't really apply to the zombies. They need to die. You can't down them from pain, which makes total sense, but made it a lot more difficult. Mostly because you have to kill them. Even injuring them to a certain point won't do anything either. The meat and potatoes of what I'm trying to get at here is that they are tough as shit. Before nighttime, I once again found a very small area inside a building that I would call home for what was a short period of time. This time around though, I would even begin deconstructing several of the walls, the flooring, and things like that so I could try and double up my walls for protection. And I'm extremely glad that I did, because all throughout the night we were completely surrounded by zombies. I mean, an absolute horde of zombies. The very next morning we ended up building a brand new steel door so we could come and go with the outside world as we pleased. We were going out once again to begin exploring more and more of the city, looking for better items and weapons and things like that, but unfortunately this time around the horde of zombies was following us and we got bit. Twice. Yes, obviously this is extremely problematic, but I said, hey, Rat Knight, my guy, calm down. We've experienced this before in the other Zombieland playthrough, and you know, that guy didn't turn into a zombie. We made our way into yet another building where luckily we would end up finding some pretty decent medicine and immediately began tending to the zombie bites. All the while that this was going on, of course, the horde of zombies had never stopped chasing us, and as a matter of fact, I think that we ended up having more begin chasing us as well during this time, so we began trying to find a way out where they wouldn't find us. After managing to deconstruct a few walls and slipping out the back of the abandoned building, we began making our way back to our base because I really wanted to have a permanent base of operations. I'm not gonna lie, this part was pretty stupid of me and pretty selfish to think that I should continue going with this base. At one point trying to dig through rock and then getting caught by a zombie, which we luckily managed to kill, and then having to dig through more rock to even try and get close to the base. Not to mention the fact that after I finally dug through this mountain to the other side to get to our base, I still had to walk through all this black sticky tar liquid stuff that is made by one of the zombies, making it very hard to try and get into the actual base and getting attacked by zombies while trying to make my way in. Eventually though, I did finally get inside. I was really starting to contemplate and just kind of ask myself if all of that effort was worth it just to get back here with a few, I don't know, mortar shells, some cloth, and some chem fuel. I really didn't have anything here. I could have just made a base somewhere else with these resources. I mean, it really didn't matter, right? I could have made a 20-minute video probably on that night alone. Okay, maybe that's exaggerating a little bit, but you know, like a solid 4 to 6 minute video, because it was a very eventful night. Speaking of which, this was the same night that our zombie bite infection would finally count down. Now, I'm still new to Zombieland, so I assumed this immediately meant that he would turn into a zombie, but I was wrong. For you see, after the countdown of the infection went away, we then had a countdown for 140 some hours, basically explaining that he is going to become a zombie by that time. So the first counter apparently was just basically to determine the infection? I don't know. My assumption is that the first countdown is to give you time to maybe cut off the limb of the pawn if need be, which really didn't matter for us because, I mean, we have only the one person and nobody else to cut off his limbs. I wish I could make him do it, but I can't. Now at this point, because the zombies were just absolutely beating the shit out of our walls and doors, I began deconstructing some furniture that was in another room so we would have steel to just basically build more. But of course, I didn't decide to only deconstruct furniture during this day. No, I thought to myself, I want to go out adventuring once again, which was extremely difficult in the first little bit here because of the black goo, as I mentioned earlier, and it was basically all throughout the city where all the zombies had chased me. Finally, before nightfall though, I would once again find a small little room to bunker down in. And it was within this room that we would have a good old bite of pemmican and do a bit of meditation before lying down for bed finally. And I have to say, by this point, we were only a few days in, right? I mean, I had done quite a bit. It was extremely exhausting, which is not a big deal, but I just felt like I really wasn't going to get very far because I wasn't really using any magic or anything. Which, of course, playing as a mage in Zombieland, I would expect to be using magic quite a lot. It was just not very effective, even if we did decide to use it. Weapons like pistols and whatnot were, of course, the weapon of choice. As for the actual Zombieland aspect of things, though, in that department I felt like I was doing pretty good. The survival, exhausting micromanagement of just trying to stay alive, which was really fun. It was really fun in general, just I felt like I wasn't getting that RimWorld of Magic experience. The next day, however, we would end up getting our very first raid. It was apparently someone coming from Germany, a soldier of sorts. I would, however, wager that they had no idea what they were getting into here with a city that was chock full of zombies, as they immediately got into an altercation with them. And of course, the ending of said altercation would be this soldier getting eaten, which also was a bit of a problem because that means anyone that enters a city like this is basically going to immediately be killed and eaten by zombies, which gets rid of the opportunity for us to enslave them or recruit them. And I have to say, by this point in the test run, I was getting a little bit bored. We hadn't really got to use magic much, and things were looking pretty grim. Any raiders or anyone that would come here would almost immediately be killed by zombies, so there was only a tiny, tiny sliver of hope that we would be able to get someone who could take Stone's place once he became a zombie. And obviously, there was an even smaller sliver of hope that that person would actually be someone who could do magic with some type of magical gift, so it would kind of negate the run if I continued with someone who couldn't. Now look, I realize that this sounds very negative, but I'm just kind of pointing out how I was feeling at that time testing out a run like this. There's definitely ways that I could do this and also make it very interesting, but that's the whole purpose of this video and this run. Now at this point in the run, I wanted to see what it would be like to have an extremely powerful lightning mage at our fingertips. So that is exactly what I decided to create out of stone here. Now this was sort of a test, but also I just wanted to have a lot of fun with this. With stone jacked up on some type of lightning steroids, something like that, we would take on massive hordes of zombies so that we could see what he really could do if he had, you know, this much power and whatnot. So it kind of shows what we may end up working with by the end of a 100 days video, or even before that, of course. And he truly was a titan, a god among men at this point, with very powerful lightning wands in each hand, which I did use character editor to kind of just bump those up. So those aren't actually accurate to what we would experience, but everything else is in terms of his abilities and things like that, of course. One of the best examples of this, of course, is going to be the lightning cloud ability, which basically just creates something of a spherical fog of lightning that stuns a group of zombies, which is really useful, as well as the lightning storm ability, which also is perfect against a group of zombies. The issue being, for a lightning mage, is not exactly an ability or anything like that that's good against an individual zombie. So kind of what I'm thinking is maybe we start out with a different type of mage perhaps, or even a few different mages, something like that, but I'm not really sure if that's something I want to do for the 100 days video, as I just feel like having more than one person isn't exactly going to be as challenging per se. Something else though that I took into consideration maybe is, like, after we start with one pawn, we could quickly try to attack someone. That way we could try to recruit them and or enslave them. We don't have to do it right away. For example, earlier with the Olaf kid, that would have been the perfect opportunity to do that. So it's a bit of a growing and a learning experience for me, truly. And truly having another pawn with us, trying to recruit someone or enslave someone, wouldn't necessarily be just to have the advantage of having another person to fight and things like that, of course. If we had someone who was capable of doing doctoring, if, you know, Stone were to get bit by a zombie like that, we could cut off the limb if he ends up getting an infection that we, you know, can't get to go away by doctoring it and stuff like that. So that's kind of my thinking with that. Something else though that I noticed going back through the footage to narrate and stuff to actually create this video is just the fact that my inability, not necessarily inability, but my inactivity in taking armor and weapons and stuff right from the get-go and other types of items. So that's something I've learned from as well, I think, with this, is I just need to be faster and take more action a lot quicker with that stuff. I'd like to apologize as well, because I realize that most of these videos don't include me talking for these long periods of time like this and just yapping on and on about what I've learned and my experiences and, you know, stupid shit like that of me just talking. But I thought it might be fun to show you guys a little bit behind the curtain. You know, with my Patreon and stuff, you guys get updates and stuff if you are a patron. If you're not, of course, there's rarely any updates as to what I'm doing and things like that. So this is kind of my pseudo way of doing that. I've never really showed any failed attempts or any test runs or anything like that for the 100 days videos. The 100 days videos, for me, they just take quite a while to make. At least a few days just full force going at it, you know, and stuff like that. And I do need some testing and stuff like that to see what's going to work and what's not, in which I'll use dev mode and character editor to give pawns different abilities and stuff like that, like we've seen with this, with Stone. And I just thought it would be something fun. I have this footage to show you guys, and to kind of just show you my process with making these videos. If you guys have suggestions about what you would like to see in a RimWorld of Magic Zombieland 100 days video, like crossover kind of thing like I'm talking about making, be sure to let me know in the comment section. I really appreciate the feedback. Any suggestions and ideas would be great as to, you know, the abilities, the traits like lightning mage, stuff like that I should use, just anything and everything you guys can think of. But I really appreciate you guys. I love you ever so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. How's it hanging, folks? Welcome back once again to our test run of playing as different types of mages and classes in the RimWorld Zombieland mod. Today we're using a necromancer. And naturally, of course, just as the last time, we're going to be surviving in a city all by ourselves, minus all the people that live there that will most likely end up becoming zombie chow, but yeah, you know, that's beside the point. We're starting once again today with our good old pal Stone. Although this is not the same Stone from before since he died, this Stone does have the same skill set though, and a different appearance, and he's also obviously a necromancer as mentioned previously. Immediately though, as one does in the Rim Cities mod, I began running around building to building, just looking around for items and whatnot that we could kind of map out and stuff like that. That way we'll know where they're at. I'm not taking them right away because of course we don't want to piss off the British, who are actually the faction that control this city, but we just want to know where they're at, so when the shit hits the fan, we can take them. Something useful that I learned, though, that I don't know how I didn't already know about, is you can actually eat their food and they don't get mad about that, so that came in handy. As the moon was on the rise in the cold night sky, we had found a nice little room to curl up and sleep in, but just outside our walls, the zombies were out and about. They were actually battling with the soldiers, and I told myself I don't want to fall behind like we did in the last video. I want to make sure that we kind of stay ahead of the game. So as I noticed them fighting, I ran outside because I assumed one of them was going to die, and we could use their body as a minion slave thing when we revive it. And that's exactly what we did. We ended up reviving one of the zombies, hurrah! However, the zombie immediately died thereafter. I have no idea why that is. I'm thinking maybe we ran out of mana, but I actually don't think that's what it was. I don't know, maybe it was too close to death. I'm not really sure. Nevertheless, though, I decided to try the process once more on two bodies, one a British soldier and one a zombie, and just like that, they came to life. However, I did notice the British soldier was on my side and the zombie was just another living zombie once again, which was very interesting. Unfortunately, this did mean that I couldn't just revive random zombies into a big army for myself. I would have to use humans that died, and also this meant that the zombie would attack the British, and now they really started to hate me because of that, and I had to run away. Also, a quick correction, these are Italians. I thought they were British. My bad. Anyhow, though, the Italians, not the British, were really about to start hating us because of this zombie, which also is really bad because that means that all of their soldiers are going to start looking for me all throughout the city, and unfortunately, after they became hostile with me, that's exactly what they began doing. All of the soldiers in my vicinity started storming my room. I didn't really know what to do here because they were all chasing me down. My only idea was to try to run away and use our zombie minion to try and hold them off for a while, but unfortunately they got through her. And then me. Well, that didn't exactly go how I planned, unfortunately. Well, I suppose there's no necromancer to save this planet from the zombie invasion, the horror. You know what, I don't give a shit. We're gonna have to start anew. Which, you know, honestly, in my opinion, it's not a big deal. This isn't the 100 days video. We're just doing a little bit of testing. Who cares if I got the shit kicked out of me in the first night? It happens. I was beginning to think that maybe Stone is something of a bad luck charm. Maybe we should change him up a little bit. Maybe make him into a lady. So that's exactly what I decided to do, and we ended up naming this handsome young lady Stony. Haha, see that a bit different, isn't it? Yes. But I suppose all I can do now is hope for a different outcome. Once again, of course, we began by going building to building, yada yada. You know this by now. We're looking for items that we can use once the shit hits the fan, of course, like I mentioned earlier. I do think the Necromancer is extremely promising, even from that brief little play we had there with Stone before he died. We got some useful information from that, knowing that we can't revive zombies because they just come back as zombies. Now that it is nighttime once again, though, in this British city and not Italian, the zombies have come once more and they are attacking the soldiers, so of course I put Stony into action. We're going to try this one more time. Bit of a spoiler alert, I'm a bit of a dum-dum, and the first body I tried to revive was one that a whole horde of zombies was feeding on, and this didn't exactly work because it couldn't get out from the horde and they killed it again. Thankfully though, the second time's the charm, and we ended up doing this once again with another body, and this body managed to escape. I don't know what to call these, I'll just call them zombie minion body things. We met up with our zombie minion body and we began running away. And then there were two. Now I will say, in what little bit of testing that I have done off screen, having more than one pawn in the Zombieland mod is just extremely useful, so even just this one minion is amazing. Well, compared to only having Stony, of course. Thankfully, we have managed to find a small room on the other side of the city that we can lie in for the night. That way we can ensure that the zombies don't end up eating us. Now, just as another line of defense, of course, though, we ended up having our zombie minions stand guard. Luckily, they don't have to sleep, which is coincidentally just like all the other zombies that are invading this city, killing all the soldiers, which, you know, I'm not going to complain too much about that because those are fresh bodies to add to the army when we upgrade our skills, of course. But speaking of which, of course, the very next morning we rushed Stony out to where a dead soldier was lying next to some zombies to try and bring them back to life. This did work, and luckily we managed to get them away before the zombies could kill them once more and begin eating them. We then quickly booked it with our new zombie minion friend and just got the hell out of there before they could chase us down and kill us. We began running through more buildings looking for more items and whatnot as well, but unfortunately I noticed we lost one of our zombie compadres. Now, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but looking back on the footage and whatnot, I was pretty sure that we had just ran out of mana. It took me a moment while playing to even notice, and by the time that I did, it was way too late. Not that there was really much I could do. Anyhow, we didn't have any mana potions or anything like that. I think the best thing that we can really do is try to upgrade our skills and whatnot to increase our mana and just also reduce the cost of having these zombie minions. And of course that's exactly what we decided to do. But with the devastation of losing our first zombie minion over with, it was time for us to begin looking for more items. Specifically, Stony found some Twinkies to munch on as well as a rifle, and we also ended up finding a rifle and whatnot for our other zombie minion. And you know, finally, Stony didn't feel so lonely after all. Even though we were surrounded by British troops, none of them were our friends. Not like good old Nitro here. Nitro, of course, is such a good friend that we took him along, going through more and more buildings, mapping out these items. Now, I know you're probably getting sick of me saying that. Believe me, I'm getting sick of saying it, but that's what we were doing, so I have to narrate it, of course. But if that's boring, I do have an interesting little tidbit here. We decided to finally start stealing these items like armor and weapons and mana potions, etc., etc., and so that really pissed off the British, and they started trying to kill us. I mean, an entire zombie horde attacking your city that may wipe out your faction and the entire planet? Pfft, but one necromancer stealing a mana potion? Oh, that's where we draw the line. Unfortunately, for making the stupid decision of trying to murder us, we ended up killing this British soldier, and we would end up adding him to our new squad of zombie pals. The only problem was we did indeed reduce the cost of maintaining these minions and whatnot, but we still didn't have enough mana. Luckily, there were some mana potions here in the corner of the building, and thus now we have enough. We had our new gray and rotting friend pick up his rifle once more and join us as we would run and hide in the corner of the building, and I was trying to figure out what we should do next. For you see, the city is kind of overrun with zombie hordes at this point, which is very cool and very fun, but also makes things a little bit more complicated. We blasted a hole in the wall, that way we didn't open up the doors and get met with any zombies, and of course we went adventuring once more. Now, something that was also making things a little bit more complicated, not only were we having to deal with these large groups of zombies, but there were still British soldiers who were upset with us and trying to hunt us down within the city, even though there are zombies literally roaming the streets. But apparently they have nothing better to do. You know what though, I'm not gonna complain too bad because they were quite literally fuel for the fire that was our up-and-coming army. And by this point we had quite the little squadron, a total of 3 new rotting friends. It was spectacular. It made clearing out buildings and whatnot so much easier as well, and it also made trying to keep Stony safe at night from any zombies or soldiers or anything that much easier as well. And the fact that the minions don't actually have to sleep at all does make it extremely overpowered, but I do feel like it's kind of balanced with the Zombieland mod, since the zombies outside our doors don't sleep at all either, and they can come in at any time over the walls if they get too bunched up. So I feel like it does, it balances just a tad. By morning, we had a raid from the United Kingdom, meaning that the British soldiers had some reinforcements coming in, which, unfortunately for them, meant that they were going to be eaten. But luckily for us, this did mean that we had more people to raise back from the dead if we so wished. Oh, and you bet your sweet ass you had better believe that we did so wish. However, of course, we're going to need to try and lower the upkeep of them some more and whatnot. Yeah, we got plenty of time, though. Today, I would move around Stony and her zombie squad and just try and look for more items, of course. But this time around, I wanted to find some items that we could use for recreation and different purposes, like maybe even some bionics and stuff like that. We maybe just try and really soup up Stony and give her some really wonderful base here within the city. Well, that was my plan, at least. Stony, however, had other plans of sitting around and playing the game of for basically the entire rest of the day, because she really needed to get her recreation up, otherwise she was going to have a mental break, but that was okay. I guess I would allow it. And of course, as people and places were being torn apart in the streets by the hordes of undead, ours would stand idly by our side all through the night, staring at us while we slept. We did, however, end up getting a very early start to the day, and I ended up picking up a TV, we ended up picking up the rest of those mana potions, and we also ended up using a skill trainer for melee, and it added about 5 points, which was pretty good. And then we were off once more. As the sun began to shine, we were looking for more items to collect to bring back to our base, which at this point I hadn't actually determined a good spot for it, but I figured that we would find it later on. However, unfortunately, I didn't realize that the turrets were still operational. And by the time that I did realize, it was already too late, unfortunately. Yes, this entire second run was ended by one uranium slug turret, and one singular bullet hit Stony that caused her to die. Without Stony, we couldn't even keep our minions going, of course, because they belonged to her, and it was over. I did try to keep them going as long as I could, because the game didn't immediately kick me out of the city onto the world map, but eventually that did end up happening, unfortunately. And unfortunately, just like that, yet another run is dead in the water. But, it's not a complete loss or anything like that. We actually learned a lot of valuable information. I think that instead of using one person for a 100 days video, I'm thinking of compiling a team of different types of mages, or just magical abilities, like a necromancer, a priest, stuff like that. I know a lot of you guys have said that in the comment section as well, so if you have more suggestions and ideas like that, be sure to let me know, because I think that would be a wonderful idea. And of course, there are several classes of fighters as well, like fighting abilities and whatnot. We don't just have to use people with magically gifted traits and stuff, although I would kind of like to maybe stick with that. Although I do know, one thing for sure, the necromancer is definitely going to make it on that team, because there are a lot of benefits to having a necromancer. Like I mentioned though, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Your suggestions, your ideas. If you want to say, hey Rad, I love you ever so much, that would really tickle my fancy and make my day. But I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one. I hope you have a good day. Goodbye. It's no secret that I've been planning on doing a 100 days video in RimWorld Zombieland as some type of mage or something of that sort. I've even made 2 other videos on that topic, kind of preparing for it. And I really wanted this to be the 100 days video, but spoiler, that's not exactly what happened. Of course, though, it is still quite the interesting adventure with our World War II factions and their beautiful cities that they inhabit. But of course, something else that inhabits these cities are the mindless, nightmarish undead hordes. To start us out here, we have a handsome young fella named Rock, who is, maybe we could say related to Stone from the previous videos. He doesn't have anything too special in terms of skills, but he is, of course, a necromancer. Now, in most of my Zombieland videos, I've actually been in a faction city, but I'm not doing that this time. I wanted this to be a 100 days video where I actually have my own base. We would travel to these cities to get items items and things like that, but I didn't want to make a base there. So I began by deconstructing runes and stuff like that to actually build myself a small base. And for a time we were basically just living off the land, eating berries and sleeping out next to some concrete that he had yet to remove. The very next day we would begin working on our shelter. I decided to build something like a small little stone shack into the mountain here so that we could actually mine into the mountain and make it much larger in case we get stuck in there because of zombies. And sticking with that theme, I also decided to go out and harvest a bunch of food just in case, once again, I got stuck in there, which didn't end up happening, so I ended up going out to a nearby city to try and collect some resources before the hordes actually came. My way of thinking with this as well is that if we're in this city when the hordes of zombies finally do start showing up rapidly and whatnot, a lot of the people in the city will get eaten and thus distract the zombies so we can run away. Plus, since we're a necromancer, when they do start getting killed by the zombies, we'll be able to raise them from the dead and start our army. Luckily, as we found out in previous videos, the people in the city don't mind if you eat their food, so I stole some of their pemmican before using their game of and then eventually taking a little bit of a snooze. Our peaceful slumber would quickly come to an end though, because the zombies had finally started spawning in and killing the inhabitants of this city, which means that it's time for us to spring into action by trying to steal some of these corpses. We and our undead slave began running away and unfortunately cracked open a door to a massive room full of zombies, and we just started running away again. Luckily, it wasn't too hard to get them off our trail. Like I mentioned, the city is still currently full of soldiers and other colonists of this faction. For the entire night though, we would let Rock sleep in somebody's dining room while our undead slave stood guard. The very next morning though, I realized that another of these soldiers was getting torn to bits just outside the very room that we were staying in, so we popped our heads out for just a moment to raise them back from the dead, and then the three of us began to run off once more. I planned on leaving the city entirely now that we have two undead slaves, and at this time I realized that I could steal all kinds of shit from the Germans who own this faction, so of course I done that. Unfortunately, this did make them hostile to us, but we don't care. We immediately began heading all the way back home, and it wasn't too long after that that we arrived. But immediately after arriving back at our home base, we had a zombie spring up out of the ground damn near right under our feet, so of course we began attacking it. But this was the first zombie in our territory, the first of many, as you'll see very shortly. Because of the zombies that were beginning to spawn and climb up out of the ground, I decided to lock the three of them in our base like I had planned early on and just began letting them mine out the mountain, right? I thought this was a great idea. Well, turns out I basically just trapped them in their own damn tomb. This was not a good idea. Of course, zombies, some of them able to open doors, immediately began coming in and we would have to fight them, which we did, and we killed them, but this was an ongoing issue up until the point that so many of them had surrounded the base that they actually climbed over the walls. Unfortunately, I was getting extremely nervous while this was going on, and I had Tina, our undead slave, start throwing grenades to try and kill one of the zombies, and I accidentally kinda killed the other undead slave. Yeah, this was a real shit show. I was also using silver and gold to try and build double walls because I know that they can't climb over those near as easily and they'll have to destroy some of it. The problem is silver and gold kind of suck ass and we were running low on them anyway. Tina, our undead slave, was trying to go into the other room and collect some of our belongings that we needed. Unfortunately, the zombies immediately climbed over the wall and then they were just all coming through. One of the doors wasn't closing. It was getting bad. The only real solution I had to this problem was to try to dig our way out, but unfortunately Rock was on the cusp of a mental break. He was needing to sleep, so we really didn't get much digging done. Then things got worse when our other undead slave that died ended up becoming a zombie and tried to kill us. And then things got much worse when she was somehow able to take Rock down. Couldn't imagine how that happened. I mean, it couldn't be all the beatings and biting and everything, I'm sure. But at this point, I told myself, alright, this footage, just not use it. It's unusable. We're just gonna scrap it and we're gonna try again, like I'd done quite a few times. But then we ended up having a man in black, and not just any man in black. This person was actually a fire mage. So I'm like, oh shit, jackpot, baby. You know what? This isn't going to be a necromancer run anymore. Sure, playing as a fire mage is going to be pretty damn difficult, I'm sure, but at least we can carry on with the RimWorld of Magic kind of trait list and stuff, right? But we need to get the hell out of this territory because there is a massive horde of zombies that has formed. So I decided that we would actually end up leaving this area and then we would go somewhere else and make a new settlement, which of course we did. And we immediately began using the resources of this new area to build a new base, as well as some runes that were already there. And for the most part, especially in the beginning of this new map, it wasn't really an issue. There weren't many zombies and we were just mining some steel. I had planned on using steel to try and reinforce the walls of our little rune base that we had created and whatnot, and I was going to also do some outer walls around it to try and keep zombies out. Unfortunately though, this task proved to be much harder than I thought it was going to be because, you know, I said a moment ago that, hey, there aren't many zombies, we're just mining some steel and having a good time. Well, that very quickly changed, unfortunately. And because of the newfound circumstances of this new zombie horde, we were once again stuck trying to hide inside our base. This time around though, basically the entire base had double walls, so they couldn't get in, but they were trying to break through. I didn't exactly know what to do. Thankfully, this is not a cave, so they're not all stuck right around the entrance. Some of them are actually around the sides of the base, and I realized that if I moved to certain sides, they would try and follow me that way, so I done that, and then I ran outside trying to run past them, and hopefully kind of tricking them into running around the map so I could come back and work on my steel walls, but they still chased me down. I tried fighting them off, but unfortunately the gunfire would only attract more zombies, so I decided to try and run back into the base, but unfortunately, because of the fire that I caused, the zombies were on fire and our base was made of wood. They would attack it, and thus the base was a raging inferno. I became a little bit desperate and decided to crack open an ancient danger, hoping that any ancients or mechs or anything that were inside would try and fight the zombies. Unfortunately though, I hadn't tested this beforehand and it didn't really work. And when I say tested beforehand, I simply mean I hadn't tested to see if mechs would attack zombies. It does seem like the mech is trying to melee attack them, but he's not firing at them. However, of course, because I'm stupid and decided to poke my head out once more, he immediately began firing at me, and all of a sudden he's got this laser-eyed aim where he just hits me with his beam grazer, and now I'm on fire, and it's a whole shitstorm. To make matters worse, of course, because I didn't have control of him, we were immediately downed by zombies, and you might think this is the end of the story, but somehow, way, shape, or form, we had yet again another man in black. I didn't know that the game offered two of them like this, but apparently it does. I had considered trying to continue this 100 days video as a 100 days video now that we had another man in black, but he's not a mage, he's not magically gifted. Of course we could just play as him normally, as a normal person, and try to capture and recruit other mages or something, but it just felt kind of cheaty. It didn't feel right of me to continue with someone who's not a mage, and also after the second time of being downed and getting yet another man in black, so it just didn't really feel fair. Kind of felt like cheating to me. But I really wanted to share this failed run with you guys, especially since I ended up getting so many chances to try and continue, and you know, I just thought that that was so interesting and so cool that that ended up happening. It's very fun. I did end up learning, so you know, we've been making these videos of me trying these different runs as a necromancer and a lightning mage and stuff like that, and you know, this one is kind of educational as well, I suppose. I've learned not to lock myself in a cave with a bunch of zombies just outside my door because they will eventually get in and I'll have nowhere to go. I also learned that mechs really suck ass at trying to kill zombies, and they're not a very useful solution to that problem. So hopefully you guys were educated on a few things as well, and you've been entertained. But of course, before I go, I want to thank you guys ever so much for watching, and thank you for supporting me, especially with my journey of learning how to survive 100 days in Zombieland as some type of magically gifted person. It's been a lot more difficult than I thought, honestly. I never really have issues with trying to survive for 100 days, and you know, the Zombieland is like whiplash. It's just so different than trying to survive in like a normal RimWorld colony, normal playthrough. So I'm glad you guys are enjoying it, like I said, and I'm having a lot of fun too. So, but I will see you guys next time. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Hey folks, how's it hanging? It is no secret that I've been working on a 100 days video using RimWorld Zombieland in a RimWorld of Magic. I mean, come on, I've even made 3 videos before this one testing out just how well this idea would go, and each one of those didn't exactly end in success. But today we're going to be giving it yet another shot, and here's hoping this time around it actually works out for us. To begin, we immediately began deconstructing some runes for some resources so that we could build our own little base. By the time that we were going to sleep, we had 2 of our colonists fall in love. They were lovers. How wonderful. It's more of a minute detail, especially since they all slept separate that night. The very next day, though, we would immediately begin working on our base, trying to build some type of outer wall, and we had planned on digging on the inside of the mountain for the actual base internal. However, with that being said, it was around this time that I noticed we had some zombies entering the territory. The first of many, no doubt. In the meantime, we would build some tilled soil and begin planting some rice, that way we don't starve to death, but we ended up having a mad rat, which really wasn't all that concerning. We took care of it quite quickly. Poor, dumb, ugly little bastard. Some time later, when trying to collect more resources to build our base, we began encountering these undead bastards. Unfortunately, they did prove to be much stronger than I originally had thought. Well, actually, that's a lie. Like I mentioned, I've done this about 3 times so far, so I knew they were pretty damn tough. I wanted to try some type of defensive technique that was actually mentioned in a comment by our good friend Hayden Robbie 7368, talking about building some embrasures, and any thrall that we get from resurrecting the dead, we put them in there and just kind of have them as a living turret, and I think that's a great idea. The only problem was, every time we came out to try and do that and actually build those embrasures, we would immediately get attacked by a bunch of zombies, which really sucked ass. Because the zombies were becoming such a nuisance, I decided that we were going to leave the base here for now, and we would actually go out to some abandoned cities or even populated cities and begin looking for resources that would help us in our quest. It didn't take us very long to arrive at our very first abandoned city, and it was just as the name suggests, abandoned. There were actually no pawns here at all, and better yet, of course, there were no zombies, well, at least yet. I'm positive that there will be plenty of them in the meantime. However, this did help me learn that leaving an area and coming back to it or going to a new area does reset the zombie population. I don't want to abuse that in the future, but I thought it was worth mentioning. We found an abandoned food storage area and decided to camp there for the night, eating some of the meals just before going to bed. After that, of course, we would continue our expedition throughout this abandoned city looking for any goodies that we could get our filthy little mitts on. And we did end up finding some. We found some recon armor, we found a pistol, we found some other types of apparel as well. And by the time the moon was out again, we were looking pretty damn dapper, if I do say so myself. Unfortunately though, our peaceful exploration throughout the city would not last, as we had more zombies entering the area. I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't really care about this city, so we decided to leave once more. We set our sights on yet another abandoned city, and immediately after arriving, I had a game plan. We began deconstructing plenty of ruined buildings, and we began using those resources to try and build onto our own building as something of a temporary base. However, I noticed while building this temporary base, as it were, the timer for the zombies to arrive at this abandoned city was actually quite low, even though it had restarted and they arrived very fast. You would think with this many zombies that if we were to get raided by a German soldier that they would attack said soldier, right? They would eat him, that sort of thing. Well, apparently not. Apparently that didn't happen at all for whatever reason. I suppose they were just too fixated on us. It was because of this that we decided to come out of our little base and take matters into our own hands, killing the German soldier with our spirit wolf spell, which also gave for the perfect opportunity for Stone to resurrect them into our very own zombie slave. Just as we had hoped for, they were the perfect undead killing machine, but unfortunately with all the death and destruction that's currently going on here, we decided that it was time to leave once more, and we were going to head out to yet another city. Now this city is actually not abandoned, it is populated, and I began thinking that a populated city might be the perfect place for a base, especially since our old one was absolutely overrun overrun with the undead. Oh well, we really didn't have our roots set there anyway. As you could imagine, we immediately began exploring all the buildings throughout the new city, of course not taking anything because the people here would get very upset, but we were mapping out where all the good items were. We eventually found a very small room by the end of the night to settle in for and eat some Twinkies because, of course, as we learned in our testing, they don't care if we eat their food or anything like that as long as we don't steal their armor and weapons and that kind of thing. At one point though, during our exploration, I realized that the zombies had finally entered the city and they were tearing a poor fella apart. This was horrific for him, of course, but for us it was yet another opportunity to add an undead slave to our roster, which of course we quickly did and began running all the way back to our little base. And just like that, we had yet another undead compadre in our ranks. I mean, sure, we had to rip their soul back from the afterlife to do it, but, you know, oh well. You may call me a coward if you like, but for some time, we just tried to keep our heads very, very low. I've had too many of these 100-day attempts go tits up all because the zombies got a little too handsy, and I didn't want that happening. And unfortunately, if you're somebody that doesn't like me hiding in a room while the zombies eat the inhabitants of the RimWorld totally, unfortunately, I mean, that's, I'm sorry. That's basically what this entire run's going to be, and me traveling a lot from city to city. Speaking of which, here we are once again sitting inside this building, cowering, I mean definitely not cowering, as the townsfolk are ripped to shreds. But here is the good part, with all these townsfolk dying, that means we can start taking items. As one might imagine, the less people that are in this city, the less there are to barge in when we start stealing their weapons and armor and other bits and bobs that we like. So obviously we began doing that as much as possible, taking anything and everything that we found to be useful. Unfortunately, this did mean that we were now hostile with the Empire of Japan. But I would be lying if I said that I really cared. I mean, there's hardly anyone left, let's be honest. This city is in absolute ruins, but that does mean that anytime we go to a new Japanese city, they are going to be hostile towards us. As for this city, it would appear that it has been completely destroyed and absolutely overrun with the hordes of undead. But now with no one left to stop us, we could frolic about this city doing anything we please. For you see, with the base destroyed, we can actually begin claiming the walls and things like that as our very own territory, meaning that we could build a base here. Or at least a temporary base for the time being, but before we even think about beginning to do that, we're going to go around and pick up better weapons and armor. One of the first things of armor that we found here was some Phoenix Power armor that we gave to Get. Not only would it protect his squishy little body, but it also has a fiery grenade launcher. We also ended up finding a Staff of Blazing Power, which seems to be some type of magical melee weapon. We ended up giving it to an undead slave because I don't want to get our living pawns anywhere near those zombies to melee attack them. Just next door in another building, we ended up finding some Prestige Marine armor, some Prestige Recon armor, a Marine helmet, and some type of Persona Mono Sword. After doing that, we would then begin deconstructing plenty of walls for resources inside of one of these large buildings. The idea here is that I was going to set up a permanent base. Unfortunately though, it would end up being a very temporary base. As you can see here in the footage, every single time we deconstructed something, there was a massive lag spike, and this continued even after deconstructing this. I tried constructing some embrasures, a section where we could actually send our undead pawns out to fire at zombies, and it was going fairly smoothly during construction. Occasionally it would lag, but I decided to give our pawns some time to get their recreation up, just rest and relax a little bit while I decided on what to do. And you know, unfortunately, ultimately I decided that this lag in building and what I had planned if I were going to build a base here just was not worth it. And besides, I'm always building bases in these 100 days videos. It might be more fun to see more of a nomadic Zombieland video. So I made the executive decision to get these pawns the hell out of Dodge and out of this city. That way we can go about, well, traveling to other cities and establishing temporary bases, stealing Twinkies, and doing what we do best, killing zombies. This time around though, before we ended up traveling to a brand new city, as I mentioned a moment ago, I don't want to build any bases. So what did I do? I decided to build a temporary base here next to a small hill where we would stay for quite some time. I know, it's almost like I'm a dirty lying rat. Oh wait, I am! But for real though, because of the distance between these cities, I decided that we would set up a temporary base here next to the hill made out of wood and any other resources that we could find, where we could try and prepare for our next big travel to our next big city by growing some food, gathering some food and other resources, you know, all that good stuff. This was not without its hardships though, as we finally had zombies entering the area. They would gather up in large hordes, and they stayed pretty far from the base, but a few of the stragglers would come by and we'd have to kill them. We would immediately begin trying to sow a little bit of a garden here, that way we can gather up resources for our travel. We didn't do anything too special, we just planted some rice. I also started mining on the inside of this small hill here for the intention of basically building some bedrooms and whatnot for the colonists, but unfortunately, as you'll see in a moment, the contamination was extremely high in there. I have no idea as to why. But it was because of that I had to opt for building a separate section of the base out of wood so that we could have some bedrooms and whatnot. Obviously this base is far from perfect, but it did serve its purpose of a roof over our heads and a nice little growing zone. And to be honest with you, in a world like this that is infested with the undead, a safe place to sleep, at least for one night or even multiple nights, is something to be proud of. But now that winter had come and we couldn't grow any more crops, I decided that it was time for us to leave the area. Unfortunately, the entire map was infested, so that would mean that we would have to fight our way out, and that's exactly what we began doing. Unfortunately, Pixie was taking the brunt of the damage for a while there, which was no bueno, but eventually we did finally escape, and we entered the world map, where we would then begin our trek to a brand new city. As I had mentioned earlier, we're going to begin living a more nomadic lifestyle, so if you don't like seeing the world map and this little yellow dot traveling on it, I would like to apologize, because this is going to be happening pretty often. Traveling to brand new cities, looking for brand new shiny objects, and trying not to die all the way. Speaking of which, unfortunately just after arriving at this new city, it looks like Pixie had been bitten by a zombie and has now turned. Unfortunately, we couldn't bring ourselves to put her down immediately, so we began running away. Not only had we lost a good friend, but Gek had also lost his love. Of course, Pixie here wasn't exactly crucial to our survival on the infested planet, but, you know, I mean, she held a special place in our heart as she was one of our starting colonists. Truthfully though, we had little time to grieve as the German inhabitants of the city immediately began hunting us down. Thanks to Pixie, as well as a few other zombies that had entered the city, the Germans would be distracted long enough for us to enter further into this building and make a very temporary base for the night in this room. We finished off 2 of the soldiers that tried to attack us, and after killing them, I had Stone here bring them back to life. Well, as close back to life as you can get without craving brains. Obviously, of course, the 2 new undead soldiers would not be able to take the place of Pixie, but the extra help was nice. Gek and Stone would get some rest for the night as the others kept watch, and as I tried to figure out a way to keep them from having a mental break over their dead friend. Unfortunately though, my thinking session was rudely interrupted when 2 zombies in the next room busted down the wall, and we immediately began firing upon them until we managed to kill them both. Unfortunately though, all the gunshots must have alerted the Germans. Many of their soldiers began entering the building and began coming to this side of the city, and since unfortunately we had already lost Pixie, I didn't want to chance it, so we got the hell out of Dodge away from the zombies and the Germans. After leaving the city, we set our sights out on greener pastures and nicer cities, much more friendlier cities that were owned by Finland. But this Finnish city was extremely far away, so we decided to camp out in an area for the night and begin collecting some berries for food as well as hunting some wild boar. After collecting what I felt was an adequate amount of food for the journey, we then set our sights back out on the Finnish city. Now, I do want to address something real quick. In most of my 100 days videos, I'll do a boss battle every 25 days, and I haven't done that in this video simply because I wasn't really sure how to make that work without the zombies attacking the boss or the boss killing all the zombies. So for any of you that were wondering as to where that little tidbit in the video was, unfortunately I didn't do it this time. But don't look now, friends, we're being ambushed by a German caravan that's demanding several of our weapons and armor. Of course we're going to refuse this and kick the dog shit out of them, as you know. Funny enough, though, it turns out that one of the Germans that were attacking us is actually a sibling of Shigeko, which is actually one of our undead soldiers. Ah, reunited, and it feels so good. Could you imagine trying to ambush a caravan of different soldiers and whatnot, and one of them ends up being your undead brother, who is just basically a skeleton holding a rifle? That's some scary, messed up shit. Though I suppose in this zombie land, it's probably pretty common. Anyhow, though, looks like we beat them. It is actually time for us to actually reunite the two siblings, I suppose. Ah, there we are. Now they truly are reunited, and it does feel so good to bring a family back together like this. I really think we're heroes, to be honest with you. Speaking of heroic deeds, we decided to cut up one of the German soldiers into chunks, that way we could eat him on our journey, because even with the food that we had here on this little caravan ambush map, we didn't have enough to make it. But by cutting him up into stew-sized pieces that fit into our pockets, we'd be able to make it to the city with full tummies. Now, I do want to say, I think when we're in a caravan, it's thinking that the undead soldiers need to eat, and it may even be forcing them to eat, so that might be why we're running low on food. Regardless, though, we made it to the very snowy, icy, cold, but most importantly friendly city not too long after, and immediately began looking for a room to settle in for the evening. Before going to bed for the night, we would begin eating some chocolates to keep us from losing our minds with all the mood debuffs lately. We then of course began taking a little snoozy snooze as our undead compadres kept watch over us throughout the night. Luckily for us though, this city seemed pretty dead for the most part, except for the Finnish soldiers that were roaming the streets and throughout some of the buildings. Since they were one of the few remaining neutral factions here on the planet, basically the only faction we hadn't pissed off just yet, except for Italy, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, we decided that we would try to stay here for a few days. Of course, though, it didn't take very long for these zombies to show up and start devouring several of the citizens. Luckily, though, we were hiding inside our little nook here. At one point, we came out to try and help the Finnish soldiers, but unfortunately, they were just getting overwhelmed by the hordes of zombies, getting their asses absolutely handed to them, unfortunately, stomped into the depths of oblivion, which was very sad, but, you know, I mean, so goes another ally. We started going building to building, just looking for resources, trying to defog these rooms. Now, the reason I was doing that is I had a devious little plan. We were going to try and reform our caravan and take everything, but to the best of my knowledge, we could only do so if the rooms were not fogged. So after taking care of that little issue, we immediately reformed a caravan and began taking what we could. Unfortunately, this city, as many others, has the same old boring pistols and stuff like that we already have, but we did manage to take a battery and a mini turret, which would come in handy, as well as a holy shit ton of food. Unfortunately, though, as you might have guessed, this really pissed off Finland, and they were now hostile with us, yet another enemy in the bucket. We began making our way to yet another new city, this time an abandoned city, but unfortunately, basically immediately after leaving the old Finnish city, we were ambushed by another German caravan. This time around, the Germans didn't want any of our gear, they simply wanted our lives, and we just could not allow that to happen, so we began fighting with them, eventually killing them, but we did suffer a casualty. Luckily though, you fine folks told me that the necromancer can actually bring back the undead that were already brought back as undead, so that's exactly what we did here, and now they're back. Did that make sense? Okay, alright, good. Then we began trekking off to this abandoned city. This may actually be the longest journey yet that we've made on the world map. Remember earlier when I said, hey, I hope you're comfortable watching me on the world map, blah blah blah? Yeah, well this is why. This was an extremely long journey all the way to this abandoned city. Eventually though, we did end up making it, and then we would of course enter the city shortly thereafter. This city didn't seem to be claimed by any specific faction, and it was full of Italian soldiers who were friendly with us, and Finnish soldiers who were not so friendly towards us. Of course, after entering the city, one of the very first things we began doing was trying to eradicate all the Finnish soldiers that were here so that they wouldn't be constantly bugging us. So we engaged in firefights, killing several of them, but I didn't want to waste too much time doing that, so I began working on a base. We had our men start unloading their inventories so that they wouldn't be burdened down with all these items, and that also meant that we would actually get out the battery, which I didn't know was dead, as well as the turret. Thankfully though, even though the battery was depleted, this abandoned city does allow us to claim anything we want, since a faction technically doesn't own it, I suppose, so we claimed several batteries that we would bring back to our side of the base. We had also began deconstructing some steel chairs and things like that so we could build power conduits as well as replenish the barrel of our turret. Interestingly enough, we had also brought a tube television with us and set up a little living room kind of area where we could chillax together. The only problem was we had zombies now and we've been fighting off the Finnish soldiers, so it's not exactly peaceful. It did help out quite a bit though that the turret was actually pulling its weight in zombie kills, somewhat. And of course we were constantly sending out our bone squad to finish off any ghouls that were hanging around our doors or walls. You get it, bone squad, cause they're dead. I also forgot to mention at some point there was a disgusting acidic smog that entered the area, so that's why the air is green. But enough with the spooky music. It's time that we start deconstructing some floors and walls and all kinds of other junk so that we have resources to build ourselves a little embrasure turret setup. The normal turret could be easily destroyed, but if one of our undead soldiers is destroyed, all we have to do is come out there and bring him back to life and voila, yet another turret. Unfortunately, though, some time later, we had our very first raid from the Algelslin. We had a mech hive that fell somewhere, and they were really pissed off. But surprisingly, not at the zombies. They didn't really seem to give a shit about any of the undead hordes in the area. You know who they did give a shit about, though? Little old sitting here all nice and not bothering them in our little building. Unfortunately, I forgot to claim the front door, so they basically just waltzed right in, unfortunately. We tried to go out the back door, got trapped in between two alleyways or whatever, and then they just started basically beating the shit out of us. After Gek fell down, I tried to get Stone and the others in with some melee weapons. I tried using the blazing power staff, whatever. I didn't even read the description. Apparently, it's not a melee weapon at all. After another of our undead soldiers fell, I tried to get Stone the hell out of there as soon as possible. In our attempt to try and rescue Gek, though, we ended up losing both of our other undead soldiers, and it was just Stone now. Thankfully, though, Stone was still in enough range that he could resurrect our fallen comrades, and that's exactly what he did. And we tried to get Gek the absolute hell out of there, even though he could walk now. He was still extremely slow because of a heavy contamination. I tried to rally all of our colonists back together, that way we could try to get the hell off this map and go somewhere else, to another city, to a small settlement somewhere that we could create ourselves, just anywhere but here, essentially. But we were really struggling to get away from all of them. Well, honestly, we weren't struggling. It was just Gek that was struggling, and he was struggling very hard from the heavy contamination. He could barely move, and unfortunately, he eventually was beaten down by zombies and shot. I tried to save him, I really did, but unfortunately I couldn't. So now it's just going to have to suffice that we bring him back to life and try to get him the hell out of here, which we eventually did along with our other two undead soldiers, as well as Stone, of course. We immediately began putting some distance between us and the abandoned city, but unfortunately we wouldn't be able to go very far as we didn't have a lot of food, so we settled to make a temporary settlement between an Italian and German settlement. It wasn't perfect, but it did have berries, and it would be home for now. I did want to take a second though and express how excited I am to have Gek back alive and sticking with us here in the caravan. Unfortunately though, Gek isn't a lightning mage anymore after he's brought back to life, which really does suck. Something else that is really going to suck though is the temporary base that we're going to be building here. It's basically all going to be out of wood as we don't have many other resources. I didn't feel like wasting time and deconstructing ruins and stuff like that when we're only going to be here for a few days, so we cut down a bunch of trees and used all of that wood to build something small. We of course began trying to beautify the place for Stone, as he's the only one that's going to be concerned with it, as he's the only one that's technically alive. We also planted some rice, which was nice. And you guys know me, if there's anything I am, it's a problem solver. Not really, but after we got settled here in this little base, I decided to start making some short bows for our undead soldiers. Yes, they also really suck ass, but it's better than nothing. We were also finally able to harvest the rice that we had planted. This will be a good little food nest egg, that way we can use it to travel and not starve to death. After a while though, this place became like all the other places that we've been to before, completely overrun with the hordes of undead, and our little short bows were basically doing nothing against them. And I thought for sure I had a great big brain idea that I was going to come out and try to kill as many of these zombies as possible, and if we couldn't do that, we were going to run the hell away from this map, of course, and try to find a new city. Unfortunately though, we had a little mishap with our Doomsday rocket launcher. Yes indeed, you saw that correctly. I almost completely ended the run right there by making Stone almost blow himself up. Whoops. Thank God we didn't though, and we would survive this map, and once again, of course, leave this map in a search of greener fields. I don't know, I'm running out of lines here, okay? We've almost died too many times. But fret ye not, my friends, I'm sure there are many more near-death experiences to come. But first, of course, we're going to have to find a new city to hang out in, and I will be honest with you, a bit of a spoiler here, so skip ahead if you don't want to hear it. Okay, I assume the rest of you want to hear it. This is going to be the last city that we visit. Do we die? Do we make it? I suppose you'll have to wait and find out. This city, once again, is not owned by any specific faction, from what I can tell, and is just another abandoned city. Now, this one actually had quite a bit more furniture and food and things like that in it, so we immediately went door to door, building to building, looking for these things. And upon finding these beds and lights and basically anything else we could that we liked, we brought them back to a small building where we would once again set up a temporary base. This new temporary base was fairly comfortable and fairly beautiful. I mean, for God's sake, we even had our very own table built. Table for one? Oh, you get it? Because Stone, he's all alone by himself. I mean, technically, he does have his two undead soldiers, but I doubt either of them are doing much talking, seeing how their lips fell off, which is probably pretty scarring, seeing how he and Gak were pretty good friends before this, unfortunately. A little bit of time later, though, we ended up having yet another raid from the Mech Hive, and as you probably guessed, once they arrived, this time around, they didn't really give a shit about the zombies again. The small group of mechs had gathered up, and they were planning, I guess, on assaulting us, so I was trying to figure something out, but the craziest little thing happened. They ended up attacking some insectoids instead, and here I am thinking, oh shit, this is it. They may just kill each other off. We won't have to deal with them. This could be our big break. This may just save us until day 100, but unfortunately they were actually beating the absolute dog shit out of the insectoids, so we had to try and come up with a plan. And my plan was to just try and rush the mechs as they came through our door, but funny enough, we stayed inside and they didn't actually try to destroy the building. They didn't try to open any doors or anything. We had claimed all of the doors and walls, so I was shocked to see that they didn't attack them. They did, however, occasionally attack a zombie just outside the walls, and it scared me because I thought they were trying to come in, but turns out they weren't, which meant that we could basically just sit tight until we finally reached day 100, which was basically all we could do anyhow because they would absolutely stomp us unless we snuck away from them. Unfortunately, though, however, tragedy would strike once again. Shigeko apparently had a zombie infection that I was oblivious to because, well, I guess I just suck at the game, and they ended up turning into a zombie. For whatever reason, she turned into a child zombie, which made it very hard to land any shots on her as she was very small, but in the end, unfortunately, we did end up having to put her down. Rest in peace, our old comrade. In spite of this tragic loss, though, thanks to our patience, we did end up reaching day 100. We basically just sat tight inside this small little building for a very, very long time, never going outside, eating what meals we had, and trying to find recreation in any corner of this building. By this point, of course, the zombie population has rose exponentially, and some of them even began breaking down our door, forcing us to try and run into the other room. Luckily, we did get away from them without getting bit. But my friends, this is where I leave it in your hands. Do we continue this story? If this video does very well, I may end up doing a 200 days video as a bit of a sequel. Unfortunately, that never ended up happening, I'm afraid, but I want to thank you all ever so much for watching today's video, this supercut. Like I said, I got a lot going on this week. I probably won't really be able to get too many episodes out, maybe this weekend or something. So with Halloween just around the corner next month, I thought it might be fun to kind of start getting into the spooky feely season. I really hope that Zombieland gets updated for 1.6 at some point. I know it never got updated for 1.5, which really sucked because we all really enjoyed playing it. I think there's some other mods you can put together in combination to kind of get the same experience, but nothing ever beats the classics, eh? Again, though, I love you guys, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.